As a next step in the Getting Started with Application Development with the VLab SDK lesson, you will create a basic, fully functional, interactive on/off switch. Begin by creating an Cube game object named Switch. Configure the game object as follows. Next, create a folder for the project's material assets. Create a material for the body of the switch and configure it with a color of your choice. Assign the material to the switch game object. Next, create a child cube game object on the switch game object and name it switch button. Remove the game object's collider. It will be replaced by a custom collider, suitable for the desired functionality, over the next steps. Now, create a material for the switch button in its off state and configure it with an appropriate color. Assign the material to the switch button off game object. Also, configure the switch button game object as follows. This is how the switch looks while off. Next, rename the switch button game object to switch button off and create an empty parent for it named switch button. Duplicate the switch button off game object and name the new game object switch button on. Configure it as follows. Also, create a material for the switch in its on state and assign it to the switch button on game object. To continue, add a box collider component to the switch button game object and configure it as follows. This represents the entire active area of the switch regardless of its state. Next, add a switch state empty game object under variables. This will reflect whether the switch is on or off. Locate the variables folder under VLab SDK in the project's assets and select the concrete Boolean variable component. Add a concrete Boolean variable by dragging it onto switch state. Next, locate the on-off switch component under VLab SDK's effectors and drag it onto switch button. Set the state field of the on-off switch component to the switch state variable. Let's test what we have built so far. Open the variable inspector and run the application. Enable real-time updates and observe how the switch state variable's value changed between true and false as you click on the switch. To continue, let's make the switch change its appearance according to its state. Create a switch state index empty game object under variables. Assign a Boolean to int variable component to it, found under the VLab SDK's mapping variables assets. Set the component's input field to the switch state variable. Again, open the variable inspector and inspect how the variable's value changes as well while you are interacting with the switch. Next, create a switch state visual set empty game object under behaviors. Add a game object swapper effector component to it. Add two target entries to the component and set them to the two switch button on and off game objects. Also, set its input field to switch state index. Now, run the application and observe how the switch's visual appearance changes appropriately according to its state as you interact with it.